Baudrillard books contain far more ideas than I'll cover in today's video in my analysis. One of Baudrillard's ideas is the concept of hyperreality. In my opinion, the most successful example of hyperreality is pornography. We all understand that pornography in principle contains nothing that doesn't exist in real life, but everything there is hyperbolized to the extreme. Adult intimate life is hyperbolized. These plots, scenes, actors, their emotions, ohs and ahs and signs are far from reality. It's all hyperreality. Propaganda is another example of hyperreality. They take something that somehow could exist, they invent it, they exaggerate it, and people who watch television believe these advantageous facts much more than the reality that actually surrounds them. Our lives today are largely connected to news, content, social media, Instagram, all those poses of people, their smiles, how happy they always are, the masks they wear to hide their pimples. These are also examples of Baudrillard's hyperreality. Disneyland is another interesting example of such a reality. Baudrillard called it America in miniature. This is very interesting, and those who have been there understand perfectly well what we are talking about. Another very important idea of Jean Baudrillard's is, of course, simulacra, the idea around which the film The Matrix was built. He shows the system in which we live. Baudrillard believes that capital and the market are simply beings within the new reality and hyperreality, beings that have their own will, their own realization, and control the symbolic system in which we all live. In a way, they control us all. To some extent, we all now live in such a disciplinary community. This is a term coined by Michel Foucault. Contemporary culture isn't a culture of meanings as it once was. It's a culture of symbols. Previously, culture's purpose was to orient people toward meanings. Today, we all rely on symbols, even on how we dress. Previously, clothes indicated that someone was a shoemaker or a doctor. Today, our clothes are brands, and through them we identify with one group or another. Therefore, we negative the symbolic system according to the brand we wear. Baudrillard is constantly assigned the greatest role of media, which is partly considered a conveyor belt of symbols. Their main purpose is to deceive people about reality. That is, to create exciting news, stories to amuse and surprise, rather than to give people an understanding of reality. He also sometimes ponders our future. One of these quotes, postmodernity, ends with the mechanical prosthesis. After a mechanical prosthesis, there will be a biological prosthesis. Essentially, this will be a process of biological human enhancement, through which human capabilities can be enhanced. That is, a person who no longer recognizes themselves as human not only doesn't recognize themselves as human, but also has all the necessary technical capabilities to do so. Baudrillard also touches on the issue of consumer culture. Later, his ideas inspired the creators of the film Fight Club. Remember that only by losing everything will you gain freedom. He hints at the problem of consumer culture. After all, we all know that those who consume a lot never have enough, and in a sense, this is a problem for humanity. After all, people must constantly work by symbols, for brands, for banknotes, for consumption, to achieve the standard of living shown on social media, and they too are partly hyperreality. Baudrillard says that consumption has changed. Previously, this was the period before the evolution of production. Consumption made sense. You'd buy a horse to ride somewhere, to work in the garden, to travel to the next town. Today, people will buy a horse simply to have it, and perhaps to photograph it and post it on Instagram. In other words, the very meaning of consumption shifts from instrumental to symbolic. It's very interesting, very funny, but also very stupid. But this is the moment we live in. First, the market creates a symbol, and then we, as slaves to symbols, must work for it. It's interesting that there used to be a shortage of everything. Even at the beginning of the last century, people bought cars because they needed them. Today, people buy cars on credit and don't have enough money for gas to drive them. Marketers rule this world. They influence the creation of new symbols. Increasing incomes don't lead to improved quality of life. Status symbols are created, separate symbols for the poor which are more accessible, and for the rich. Both will never have enough resources to possess all these symbols. In the modern world, consumption becomes a race where people constantly accelerate and can no longer stop. This is where credit practices come to the rescue, when credit is imposed not simply as something extra, but as the basis for consumption. People constantly want to buy all sorts of junk and want to appear as someone else. The entire ideology of personal self-expression is an attempt to materialize their own superego. Modern people lack direction, lack peace of mind, and therefore constantly feel anxious. They are constantly stressed. This anxiety transforms into a desire to buy and buy again. We ordinary participants in consumer society. Now, the list about how it works. Television shows, documentaries, live reports, breaking news. Everywhere you are drawn into being present in the event. We think that events broadcast on television, recorded on film, mean exactly that I was there, being there without being there. What we see, what we know, like in The Truman Show, is just another level of simulation. We reject reality. We are created with symbols we believe in. We are sold these symbols in Hollywood movies. The villains wear beautiful Gucci suits. Even money is a simulacrum for us. Money was once the physical equivalent of goods such as land, prosperity, or huge amounts of gold in sacks. Now money isn't even printed on paper, but simply ones and zeros displayed on a computer. The United States gold receive is backed by pieces of paper. People can create the illusion of ownership by borrowing or renting goods. There is no need to become attached to objects, as you certainly won't take them with you into the afterlife. Consumption itself has no relation to true human needs. Consumption knows no bounds. Human imagination, stupidity, and greed no bounds. When we buy things, we consume prestige, brand, status, and what other will value. Things become symbols, just as the female body, for example, in advertising is a sexual means of boosting sales. Just as striptease doesn't offer nudity, it doesn't promise any sexual act, but keeps you at a distance. Teases. A person devotes themselves to the system for it to function. It needs people. If it could operate with slaves, there would be no free workers. Today, needs are triggered during seasonal sales. This is done automatically. My own desires and my own fantasy have nothing to do with it. We want what's advertised to us, preferably a car, a smartphone, a house like our neighbors. By what means, by what economic power will you obtain it? They don't tell you. You've been forced to accept an idea, one you don't actually need. Consumption exists precisely there, in your head. We are told of an abundance of goods and services. Salespeople are deeply concerned about your fate. They greet you with a fake smile. A team of experts worked for months on the product. Everything is at the service of your ass. One of the key illusions of consumer society is the illusion of care. Advertising speaks to the owner in her own language, with a different message for each consumer. Ready-made advertising offers for you. It seems that modern consumer society is the pinnacle of civilization, where the level of comfort rises. But is this really true? A slave can be reconciled to his position through fear, but it's unlikely that he can be broken mentally. You can be intellectually free, but if a slave accepts the master's cultural models, if he accepts his servitude with pleasure, even a collar can be made soft and comfortable. A slave is unwilling to change his position. Consumption is comfortable, humane, and with the aid of advertising tools, creates a myth about itself. A deal with the devil has been replaced by a pact of abundance. We create the illusion of owning something premium while imitating a sign that appears more expensive. All your furniture is covered with a veil with wood grain painted on it. It's as if this paper says, "I'm wood." Houses are made of plasterboard with brick facades, faux roofing tiles, lawns, and so on. These signs, like advertising products, try to pass themselves off as identical to the real thing, as genuine. This illusion of reality is based on nostalgic stories about how people once possessed genuine objects. Signs produce other signs. A sign copies another sign. You can simply buy memories and experience the feeling of owning an object. Things promise us an easier life, guarantee us security, but in reality they are symbolic dummies. If our gadget breaks, we begin to feel fear. Is it possible to overcome the power of simulacra? There is no need to fear simulacra. They control reality through the media. They determine political dominance, create the geography of the world, values, norms of behavior, etc. Government officials themselves are consumers of signs. For example, expensive cars, government offices, security guards, expensive suits. If you plan a toy bank robbery, take a toy water pistol, go to a bank and take it out. How will the authorities react to your performance? A person simulating a war with the authorities may be more dangerous to them than a real bandit. If you fight within the legal framework, it's much harder to punish you. The authorities have forbidden us to independently distinguish between the real and the imaginary. Independence, imagination, and the freedom to dream. This revolution is the most dangerous for the authorities. Man is the heart of the simulation. Without him, the show is impossible. This show can only be defeated with our minds. So this episode has come to an end. If you liked the episode, give it a like, write comments, and click the bell to be first to know about the next episodes.